Dude, when I was a teacher, sometimes I had to throw things at students. I remember probably the most I remember of school, Shannondale Elementary over here in Fountain City. My first year back from Africa, so I was in the fifth grade. And I had a history teacher who, man, she carried a switch around the room. She'd pop you on the hand if you were, Miss Smith. She was hardcore. All right, so as we had said, the plan is tonight to start the new class, Adam to Noah. So we're about to watch the video. It's 22 minutes long. And this is kind of Mackie does, his format is kind of to zoom out a little bit first and, hey, let's look at what do we got in our hands here, I started, just to tell y'all real quick, as I was writing some curriculum, I came up with this, and this is kind of the same thing that, let's say that we came upon in a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt, a book that we had no idea what is this book. We kind of blew the dust off of it, and, what do we have here? What do we find? What is this? We didn't know anything about it. We didn't know anything. What would be some of the things we would first notice? What would be some of the things? And so that's kind of a beginning point, And so Mackie's going to kind of start tonight with that. What do we have in our hands? What are some things that we need to be aware of in picking up a book that is 2,000 years, all the way from 3,000 to 2,000 years old? Most people and most practices in our culture would say, we'll get rid of it. Some people might save it for nostalgia, but it certainly doesn't have anything to teach us because we're way too smart and educated and advanced and everything. And so what is it that we have here, and why is it so enduring and lasting? And so that's kind of what's going to be tonight. He's not actually going to be in a text tonight. He's just going to say, let's step back a little bit and let's see what we got in our hands. Okay. And so, like I said last week, what we want to do is we're going to watch a video. They're anywhere every week between 15 minutes and 22 minutes, 23 minutes. Sometimes they're a little shorter, sometimes they're a little longer. And then the first thing we want to do is answer questions. Was there something in there that hey, I didn't catch that, or what was it he said there, or anything like that. And then the teacher will normally have two or three, hey, here's two or three things we need to be aware of this week. The first thing I wanted to tell y'all, because we've been talking about this 2 or 3 weeks now, and we just finished the mission of God. But I've got a list of books I have to have read in the next 2 or 3 weeks before I go to school. And so got to this one. We're supposed to read them in order. And got to this one. And this is called Missional Church. And it kind of takes the question of, so God has a mission. So God's on a mission. So what's a church look like that knows that God's on a mission and joins him in a mission, And this is just flat the best book I've ever read. It is the most clear, concise, defines terms. It's a collection of people. They don't even put their names on the chapters. They don't want anybody to know names. It's just a collection of God people who put together what a church on a mission is all about. It's called Missional Church. I just wanted you to be, it's phenomenal. I'm almost finished. We'll be finished in about 9 o'clock, 9:30 tonight with a little short paper I had to write on it. But yeah, man, it's just tremendous. Edited by Darrell Gruder. Darrell Gruder, Darrellgruder. But it doesn't list the authors. Doesn't put their names. Um, so it's kind of a picture of what a church is supposed to look like putting a book together. You know, nobody gets the credit. Nobody gets, it's just a collection. We all did this together. They say in here, one guy wrote a chapter and then he passed it on to the next guy and he wrote and edited and then passed on. And so it was kind of a collective work, you know. And so anyway, a vision for sending the church in North America. A vision for sending the church. So anyway, just wanted to mention that because I've just been like wowed. Has the best 10 pages on the kingdom of God I've ever read in my life, David. It's unbelievable. And then it has about 10 pages on the principalities and the powers that get hold of this world. You know, that's in the Bible and we talk about it, but man, they define it and say it in such a beautiful, concise way in about 8 pages. Just, this is what, you know, and this is what it has to do with the church. The church is, you know, Paul says the church is up against the principalities and powers of this dark world. Well, what in the world is that, you know? It's good talk, but what in the world does it look like every day, you know? So anyway, yeah, just wanted to mention that. Now, so we're ready to start. And just jot down questions. Remind you, if you go on the website and you go to Classroom, if you go to Bible Project and go to Classroom, you can print out all the notes or look at all the notes. They're in color, they're beautiful and have charts and all these kinds of things. If you want to look at the notes, if you want me to give you a copy of the notes, I'm more than happy to print them off for you. But they're on the website and you can look at them. So anyway, I think we're ready.
Cain and Abel, the story of Lamech, otherwise known as Lamech, in our translations, and then of course the introduction of Noah, who we call Noah in English. These are some of the most foundational stories that set the tone, the theme, the vocabulary, the main ideas of the entire biblical story. And so we're going to move slow through these important texts. The goal is not efficiency. The goal is noticing, paying attention, and really getting what for me has been a new paradigm for what these first pages of the Bible are all about. But first, to kind of orient us, none of us come to the first pages of the Bible with a completely blank slate. We all come with lots of pre-loaded assumptions, some of which we're aware of, most of which we are not. And so I'd like to tell press kind of piece. It was really interesting. It was about the Mona Lisa, the famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci, that you can go see in person in Paris at the Louvre Museum. And it was partially about the Mona Lisa, but actually what it was about was the phenomenon of the Mona Lisa. And first it began with talking about, let's say you want to go to Paris and see the Mona Lisa. This is one of the most well-known, well-discussed, most written about, most parodied, most talked about pieces of art in human history. It's certainly the most reproduced and recognizable. And so if you wanted to go see this famous work of art, it's a little over 500 years old now, early 1500s. It was like the epitome of the Italian Renaissance painting. I guess it defines what the Renaissance was all about for art historians, which I'm not. I'm just talking about an article that I read. But if you wanted to go visit this, one of the most important art pieces ever, here's what you're in for. You were in for about an hour and a half wait just to get into the room where the Mona Lisa is located. Has anyone done this before? Okay, all right. When was this experience?
7 years ago.
7 years ago.
I would say it's been over a decade.
Okay, over a decade.
Same phenomenon.
Yeah, okay, the phenomenon. So just, it's really quite remarkable. So how long were your waits? Do you recall?
At least half a day, it felt like.
Oh, really? It was a full session. It was a 2-hour experience of your day. Yes, long lines.
5 minutes if you're the first one.
I suppose so. But you probably have to camp out at the door to be the first one in. So you're waiting in long lines. And then once you finally get into the room, you were there with a crush of people right up at the ropes. You know this from experience. And you know what? The Mona Lisa that we see virtually is like you're standing right next to it. For the people who actually are in the lines and the crush of people, your experience will be more like this. Right? No, 10 years ago, the iPhones were around 10 years ago.
That was still the experience, just with everyone's personal cameras,
Yes.
still the same crowd.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, what's happening? I understand that this is an important piece of art from 500 years ago, but every day at the Louvre, for years upon years, thousands of people pour in, wait in these lines to look at this, and to have what seems like actually kind of a mediocre personal experience. That's what I went to, right? So let's reflect on this. We're talking about one of the most important artistic artifacts from the late medieval world, right, the Italian Renaissance. It was produced by a very eccentric painter, inventor, philosopher, pseudoscientist. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci was a lot of things. So it's obviously important, but when you look at the phenomenon of what the Mona Lisa not just was, but what it is now, it's so clearly taken on a life of its own. In this article, it was funny, they were interviewing people in line for why are you here? What generated your interest in it? And it was everything from, I'm a big fan of Dan Brown's novels, and the Da Vinci Code just captured my imagination. It was people who were just saying, I was here at the Louvre, it's a thing you do. There were people who had collections of the Mona Lisa parody memes on their social media feeds. People are coming for all kinds of reasons. Many of them, there were art historians in the mix. There's an interesting comment from somebody who's actually is like a historian of art and wants to studies the types of paints that were used at that time period in history. So it's about the Mona Lisa, but it's also about the kind of oil used on the canvas. And I got so nerdy about some of these motivations for seeing the Mona Lisa. So here's the basic point. What the Mona Lisa is now also really disconnected from what it was to the person who created it. Why did Leonardo da Vinci create this piece? What was in his mind? What did it represent in the context of his body of work in the time he was alive and creating it? What did the Mona Lisa communicate? I understand it's art, so it communicates on a meta level, not just simply and directly, but it said something. What did the Mona Lisa say to its first audiences? How did they perceive it? What questions or impressions did it give them? All of that is almost completely lost to history for the crush of people, it's almost irrelevant. What the Mona Lisa has become is something altogether different than what it was. If we have ears, we should listen, perhaps. It's also true that you can go to Vatican City and go to the Sistine Chapel, and see Michelangelo's depictions, famous on the upper there of the creation of Adam. On the lower left, the temptation of Adam and Eve, and on the lower right, the expulsion of Adam and Eve. These stories in Genesis have also become a phenomenon, haven't they? They have come to take on all kinds of meanings to all kinds of people over the course of a couple millennia now, more than a couple millennia. And so you could do a whole class just on that, how people have read and understood the stories about Adam and Eve on the first page of the Bible, and that would be an interesting course. What I'm going to attempt to do, and what no one can do perfectly, but what we can try and do, is step out of the Mona Lisa line and the crush of people and examine my own motives, my own biases that I bring to the story, and try and do a Sermon on the Mount kind of thing, which is loving your neighbor as yourself, and try to love the biblical authors as ourselves, and recognize that they actually had a purpose for telling this story the way that they told it, as the introduction to the Hebrew Bible, as the story that set the agenda for the whole Hebrew Bible. And so the questions that I have are important, because you're important, and they're your questions. But what we also want to do is check ourselves and recognize when I'm looking at someone else's piece of literary communication, I should at least have one step where I check my questions at the door as much as I can and ask, what is somebody else trying to say to me here? And that's more what we're after in the class sessions that lay ahead. We're going to be looking at these stories in their literary context and in their ancient cultural context. And I think what we find is that the ways that of what the Adam and Eve story has become has sometimes lost its mooring or lost its anchor from what the biblical authors were trying to say. But then other times, what the Adam and Eve story has come to mean may have a real genuine connection here, and it's important to see that connection. So there's nothing for it. We are joining the long line of people standing in line to wait and read and look at the story of Adam and Eve, and that's okay. But at least I think we can be self-reflective as we do so, and really attempt to maybe hear some new things that we've never heard before. My experience with the Bible, but especially the longer I've been in biblical studies and reading the Bible in its ancient historical context, is that things that I never thought were imaginable, things I would have never thought to hear, all of a sudden seemed so clear to me. But I just didn't have eyes to see it. Because all I was waiting in line for was to, see if the Mona Lisa looked like it did on my social media feed or something, Are you with me? So there will be moments of disorientation in the hours that lay ahead. Because there'll be some things I'm going to put in front of us that maybe you've never thought of before. And the reason I'm putting it in front of you is because it got put in front of me and I had never thought of it before. There will be things that will maybe perspectives on how to understand these narratives than maybe I was trained to in my own, religious tradition and so on. So disorientation is a key part of learning. And the goal isn't to just deconstruct everything, but it is to help me see my blind spots and help me see new perspectives that I wouldn't see without a group of other people or other biblical scholars. A lot of what we're doing is I'm just channeling the work of people who have given their lives to reading the book of Genesis in this ancient literary context and just going to help us learn from a whole history of biblical scholars. That's a lot of what we're going to be doing. So that's our mission, in as much as we can, to stare at these first few pages of the Bible and to hear what the biblical authors are trying to say, and not just what I think they ought to be saying, because that's what I think they are saying. I don't know. Thoughts or questions about that basic point? It's such a fundamental point that we're going to keep coming back to it. And there may be moments where I'll say, that's an excellent observation, that's an excellent question. Let's pause for the moment and focus in on what the biblical authors are saying. I'll create time for us to bring our questions to the table. And but I always want us to first hear, or try to hear, what the biblical authors are saying to us. So the Adam and Eve stories, there you go. There's nothing for it. You just have to start reading and learning, and a whole universe opens up. But thoughts or questions about that kind of fundamental point?
I know you've in the past given lectures about the process of kind of creating and putting together the scriptures, and so I'm curious, as you kind of talk about reading and entering the world of biblical authors, there's, I guess, different vantage points even within that of like maybe the stories as stories that might have been passed on in oral traditions, maybe even before Moses. There is like it being depicted as it is in the Torah as part of this larger Mosaic tradition that's being, and tradition held both Jews and Christians as being passed down by Moses. And then there's like the when the Torah came together into define like whatever form we have now, which might have been an exile afterwards, and I might be fuzzy on the details, and then whatever Jesus might have been reading, like Second Temple Judaism. So are those different perspectives? Is that a progressive perspective? Are those ones that you kind of, depending on the part of the text, you adopt one of those, or how do you manage those different perspectives that are all all biblical in different ways and different parts of the process of its formation?
Yes. You just anticipated the thing we're going to talk about next, which is any act of communication happens in a context. So what is the context of the first few pages of the Bible? So it's exactly what we're going to do next. So in light of that, the first point I was making, that's I think important to say, what I'm after, or at least what I'm going to point us to be after, is not what the Mona Lisa says to just anybody in line, but what the Mona Lisa meant to the people who created it, to the people who composed these narratives. However, that happened in a multi-stage process, which we'll talk about literally just in a few moments here. We'll turn to that. Because there's a multi-layered context to any biblical passage that's really fascinating once you start thinking about it. So thank you for raising that. To be continued. Other thoughts about that first point of just method and approach?
Since we don't have access to the earliest viewers of the Mona Lisa and their sort of thoughts and feelings about the artwork, where do we go to look for that commentary, look for sort of their perspective being thousands of years removed from that perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to make the case that the earliest commentary on the first pages of the Bible is actually the rest of the Hebrew Bible, in a way that we'll talk about, and then actually just trace out. In essence, think of the way like a really great movie, the time you get to the end of the movie. Have you ever noticed this? And really well done movies. I know the Coen brothers make movies that divide a room, typically. People love them or hate them. But they invest an enormous amount of energy in the first 15 seconds of every film. But if you go back and watch it again, you'll be like, oh, whoa, it's all, usually the whole movie and the meaning and the images are all in the opening scene. That seems weird and strange when you first saw it, but it makes all the sense in the world. There's a very similar dynamic to the Adam and Eve story. In the basic elements of the first pages of the Bible are just going to get set on repeat throughout the whole rest of the Bible, including the New Testament. And each later cycle of the themes and words and patterns gives you a new perspective to come back and be like, that's why that's that way, or that's why that strange word is there. It's very interesting. So, in many ways, I think the biblical authors have given us their commentary. It's just learning how to read the literature in the way it's designed to be read. So, if that sounds abstract, it is. We'll just actually do it, and it will make a lot more sense. But, yeah, I think it's a good question. Have you noticed that in the history of Christianity, especially in the modern period, these chapters are often present in debates and controversies that are fault lines between different denominations and groups? Yeah. So that's really important. The beginning of any story is the beginning of the story, which means the most key issues that define what it means to be a follower of Jesus are always some way going to be rooted, connected in these early pages of the Bible. I remember it was a professor of mine in Bible college who first pointed out, in reading the New Testament, just keep an eye on how often the early stories of Genesis are either alluded to or quoted, or that an Old Testament passage is quoted by, say, Peter, but then if you go to that passage, you'll find itself a link back to the early pages of the Bible. It's all here. And so the thing is that there's actually a lot of really puzzling, strange things in the opening pages of the Bible which explain that diverse history of interpretation. So a lot of what we'll be doing is mapping out the landscape of views. Here's one little detail, here's 3 ways that it's been taken, and thus the Protestant Catholic divide, or thus you don't get what I'm saying here. And so learning the history of interpretation, the why people learn the Mona Lisa line, it's actually important. It can help us learn about the history of how people read things. But what we're also after is trying to get as much as we can to that earliest layer of content. Okay, this was essentially my let's be warned. There's no escaping it. We are tourists waiting in line at the Louvre, and but nonetheless, let's go see the Mona Lisa, shall we? Yeah.
Okay. First of all, any questions pop up?
In your mind before we go anywhere else. Has anybody seen the Mona Lisa in here? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't experience, I've been there twice, and I didn't experience long lines. I experienced disappointment. I was like, that's it? Yeah. Oh, it's like this big. All these paintings around it are gigantic by Da Vinci, They're just 20 paintings around it by Da Vinci, and then there's this. Oh, no. It's like a poster almost. And I'm like, that's it? Yeah. Opposed to, I got to go see Michelangelo's David in Florence. Couldn't breathe when I walked in the room. Unbelievable. And it's like 20 feet tall. I thought it was like a life-size person. And it's just gigantic. And then the same thing with the Sistine Chapel. When you walk into the Sistine Chapel, you cannot breathe looking up at that ceiling. And I will confess, I took pictures. They said, don't take pictures. I said, how can I not take pictures in this room?
I felt the same way when I saw the PA.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
It reminds me, I think I preached on this many years ago, but another painting that I was drawn back to was The Last Supper.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that was Michelangelo, I believe.
That's Da Vinci.
That's Da Vinci.
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci as well.
Yeah.
And how,
Beautiful.
when it was done in the 1500s, the Renaissance period, that they, the food on the table was not kosher at all.
It was, 1,500
It would
food.
not have been at the
Yeah.
Last Supper.
Yeah.
But in their context, like he was painting, there's eel.
Yeah.
Eel. Like that was the food, the main food. That was unclean to a Jew. And other things that were there.
Yeah.
But you go, everybody's like, oh, it's the Last Supper. But you have to remove those layers.
Yes.
Get back to the real story.
Perfect example right there. Of,
He did it on
of,
purpose?
yeah, I mean, he just painted it in his context. He
Yeah,
didn't-
he just took food that they were familiar with.
Yeah.
And,
And once again, one of the things that Mackie is saying is we've lost most of that. I mean, Da Vinci didn't write down, we don't have his journal saying, this is what I was thinking as I painted The Last Supper, and there was no one interviewing him going, now tell us why you did that. Those things don't exist. We have a lot more information about the Bible. There's a lot missing, but a lot more information. And I believe as I was thinking about this class this week, preparing for it and watching this video a couple more times this week, just to prepare about God's guidance through history, of the things that have been discovered, especially in the last 100 years, as the world moves away from God and develops this scientific method deeper and deeper and deeper, they discover things that help show the Bible. There's not a coincidence there from my perspective. They've discovered a lot more of how to read ancient languages and set the Babylonian flood story next to the Hebrew flood story, next to the Sumerian flood story. Everybody's got a flood story, and everybody's got a creation narrative, all these cultures do, and we've been able to find them and read them, and for people who would do such things, and they've been able to compare and contrast and just find out a lot more about what the ancient world was like. And I don't believe that's an accident that all of that's happened as the world has gone through the Enlightenment, moving away from God and more us. That's talked about in this book too, by the way, what the Enlightenment did to the church and those things, and how many things that we look at about church and things are actually part of the Enlightenment. But anyway, so yeah, that's an important point. That was the point about the Mona Lisa helpful? Does that make the point of we really need to understand the intentions? There were lots of people at the Mona Lisa, and it was when you go through it's a long hallway that's got these openings about every 50 feet or so, something like that. And so it's in a room that's kind of open, but that room is the most full room, because even if there's 30 people in that room, 25 of them are at the Mona Lisa and 5 of them are somewhere else. And then there's times I've heard, there's 200 people in the Mona Lisa and 30 other people. So it's captivated, but for different reasons. I've heard the story about when Dan Brown's movies came out that you couldn't get in the Louvre. So why were they going to the because of, they wanted to see what Dan Brown saw in his, what Tom Hanks saw, in his movie about the Da Vinci Code and all this kind of stuff. So one of the clues was hidden, if you haven't seen or know anything about him. One of the clues to this key secret was in the Louvre, in the Mona Lisa, and in the Louvre, and different places. So people were going for different reasons. There have been so many different, 2 or 3 other things that I think he was saying here, is that, man, and I think in my faith journey, it was about 15 to 20 years ago that I began to realize everything in the Bible is in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Everything's in there. And I always keep coming back. Sharon, you said this last week. I always keep coming back. Everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. Everything I needed to know about the Bible is in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. That's often been lost in the different interpretations. And most of the different interpretations have a flaw. And the flaw is to take my world today and set it on top of Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and make it say what my world is saying. Okay? Make it say what my worldview says, and that's just not the case. Which brings a good question. Why did God do that? Why isn't the Bible updated every 10 years since it was written? Huh?
What is to update? What is. I mean, that was the...
Yeah, but there's so much. It doesn't talk about what we do with social media, and it doesn't talk about, it doesn't envision a world with telephones and space travel and nuclear war and, yeah, I mean, wouldn't it need to be updated to, huh?
It's based on the principles
Okay.
that are taught,
Yeah.
and those do not change.
Okay, yeah. I think that's a good way to say it. I think that's a good way to say it.
But it's like God made it perfect and everything, but then humans, some of them decided, they wanted something that they thought was perfect, but not that, but they wanted to change it somehow to suit what they thought was perfect or whatever. Yeah. So.
I think that's another good way to say it, another good point. It all leads up to Jesus. I mean, it tells a story, claims to be the story of the world in some way. Not that it includes every story of every person that's ever, but it does include every story because it begins with humanity was created like this for this purpose. That makes the Bible about every human being that ever lived. But in a sense, it's it zooms in on a person. It zooms in on that person's family. It zooms in on another person. And it's,
It talks about everybody, like you said, even though it don't name every individual's name.
Right. It's the story of humanity. And it's the story of the world. It's what it claims to be, There are not many people today in the world that we live in who believe that that's true. I just got to tell you. There are lots of Christians who don't believe that. I'm not just saying people outside the church. There are a lot of Christians who do not believe this to be the story of the world. Okay. Now, I struggle to see how do you remain... Being a Christian, it has to become something different. The definition of Christian has to become different in a way. But still called that. Yeah.
Is it, now this is a question.
Yeah.
Is it almost written, the creation written in the same way that Revelation is written? And we don't take Revelations absolutely literally.
Right.
But we try to take Genesis absolutely literally.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit.
No.
It's not true. It's
right,
just
exactly. Exactly. Thank you for saying that. Here's what I believe with all my heart. Something can be literally not true and absolutely truth and accurate. It's conveyed in a way. It's communicated in a way. And that makes sense. And yes, to answer your question, very similar concepts in Genesis and the way Genesis is written to Revelation. The very similar context. Now, do we write in that way today? No, we don't. That's one of the steps that's hard, is because we don't write in those ways. We don't think in those terms. But the ancient people did. It was very common to them and very, very, I would say, easy to understand. Easier to understand. Maybe it was even easy to understand. It didn't mean it was easy to live. I mean, Israel has showed us that it's not super easy to live. The reality that the God of this universe created this world in order to be present with humanity in this world, that's tough. It's tough to live with God, and it's not tough if you follow His rules for life, but
want to change it and everything. And
exactly.
Make it so it fits our life instead of us trying to change to fit it.
Yeah.
And obey it more.
Yeah. It really does a great job of explaining why is there so much struggle and trouble in this world? Why is there division? Why is there the way that the ancients thought through that is so beautifully depicted in Genesis. It's harder for us in the last 400 or 500 years and the way humanity thinks now, the way we think without even knowing how we think. It's so much harder for us to understand that than it was for the ancient people to understand that. They had a way, and the big thing is that we've developed the scientific method, and it's brought lots of good things. It's been wonderful things. It doesn't hugely all the time help with questions such as these that are being asked. And so we've in a sense kind of ignored that in some ways, and I think we're paying for it now. I think we're, as younger people in this day and age, as we arrive here where we are and where we live, are having a harder time connect. They're having a harder time to connect to that story that's told in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. They've pretty much rejected the fact that, God in a 24-hour day, in a week, that's not even talk. Let's not even talk about that. That's just so ridiculous, But it's also not exactly what the ancients were trying to say. So we have to kind of step there, and that's what Tim Mackey said. I want to make a case that we step there, and listen to them. Love them as we love ourselves, and listen to what they had to say in their day and their place. We need to do that today with younger people, We need to step in their place and listen to what they say and hear what they say rather than shout down a bunch of rules to them, as well. Mark, what were you going to say?
I really like what he said about disorientation.
Yes.
Disorientation is a key part of learning, and we want to see blind spots and new perspectives.
Yeah.
And as you look at Genesis, almost every page there's disorientation.
Yeah.
And that's life.
Yeah.
We're going through Psalms. Most of the Psalms have disorientation as part of it.
Yeah.
The thing is, what do you do with the disorientation?
Yeah.
In our culture, we want to solve it. Nobody should ever be disoriented.
Yeah.
And if you are, there's ways to cover that. And
It's a bad thing. It's a bad.
things.
Yeah.
You pick whatever kind of addiction you want, we'll give it to you because you can cover the pain. You don't have to deal with it.
It's an incredible. Let me speak my own journey. I was completely dizzy, had a headache, and disoriented with Genesis 1, 2, and 3 for about 8 or 9 years when I first started noticing this. And I was standing up in front of kids teaching the Bible every day, having to do that some days not really feeling like it, not feeling it, not really feeling it. But yeah, man, I feel like I still find myself disoriented all the time, but you can also kind of you can get your bearings. You have to spend a lot of time, both in the Word and finding people that will be your friends like Mackie, who will help you and help you see things, and Gruder, who will help you see things, and things like that. Listen to people, pray a lot. I've found myself in my journey, probably the first 20 years of my ministry life was a constant run. Treadmill was on full blast, going. That's what you do when you're a minister. You just go full out, man. As I look back on that, I see more that there was some, honestly, confessionally, some of that was for the sake of other people to see how fast I could run. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But then when I first noticed this, everything's in the Bible here. What's going on here? It caused me to slow down. I had some people that came along at the exact moment they were supposed to come along in my life. I could give you their names, but that's not that important. Who said, "Now, this is what you do with that. This is, And so it's led me to this point. To be continued. We don't know the future seasons of the episodes, but it's led me to this point to say, I really want to understand if I'm going to minister to some families and some young people, and God keeps putting me in their life every day. I really want to understand how to do this well. I really want to. It seems to me what I've found in here is the goal is that their children should be faithful. They're not even born yet. Their children should know God. Their children. And so how do we do that today? How do I do that today? And I have discovered and found that more time with this and more time in prayer is a lot better than running as fast as I can run, And so, although every encounter with kids is important, and then all of a sudden this guy walks up to me and says, let's walk it through in the lens of a doctoral program, And I'm like, okay, let me listen to that and hear that. And I have discovered that this is the way that God wants to reveal this to me of what do we do? What's it look like 10 years from now? What's it look like 5 years from now? Still doing it every day. Still, picked up kids today, took them home, taking Jordan to a job interview tomorrow morning, and because he's disoriented right now. He's lost. He doesn't know what to do. He's graduated from high school and has no idea where to go. So we're starting at Casey's. That's the beginning point of the journey. But he has such higher dreams and aspirations, than being at Casey's. And I'm not putting down anybody at Casey's. I'm just saying I want to make a difference in this world through teaching, But how in the world do I get there, and all that? I'm sorry to say all that, but everything that we think through in ministry and life and church and living life is in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. If we can get oriented there a little bit and understand, man, the rest of the world, the rest of the Bible comes alive. He mentioned how it just goes through the rest of the Bible. Think about when the Jews built their tabernacle and their temple, they decorated the walls with Garden of Eden. Okay? God says in Ezekiel, I'm going to make the land look like the Garden of Eden. Okay? And then we get to Revelation, and what's the new creation look like? The Garden of Eden. And so there's a reason why that just keeps It just won't go away. It won't go away. They were in the Garden of Eden. They get banished from the Garden of Eden. At the end of the story, they're back. It's changed a lot. It's changed into a city. It's a city garden, you know. And man, there's the implications of that are just, God has taken what we've done to protect ourselves. And when you read Genesis 4, the first city was built to protect yourself from other people. Let's get our little group of people and let's protect ourselves from everybody else. You know. And then, but when we read Revelation 22, it's God said, I got rid of cities. You guys had a terrible idea about cities. No, he made it, he's fixed it. He made a city what a city could be. He took our work, you know, he took our work of a city and he made it what it could be. And took away all the things, the fear and the death. And he flew the gates open, you know, and just leave them open. What? Leave them open? There's critters out there. They'll kill us. No, what are you talking? Leave them open. This is that kind of city. Leave them open. You know, there's all that kind of, and it goes all the way from beginning to end. It goes all the way. So, yeah. What else? So, take these three, I guess these couple things, and then if anybody else has one to add. We're not reading, we got to get our bearings. And that's what this class is we're getting our bearings. We're the expert. And Mackie is an expert. One of the things I love about Mackie is he's not afraid to say, here's 5 other experts that I learned this from. You know, he doesn't have to get up and say, I thought of this all by myself, you know. And there's some like that, and there's some that will say, man, these other people have helped me so much. I heard the other day a YouTube video of him thanking the person who set him on his journey, the Bible teacher, that Bible teacher. I mentioned him Sunday. Ray Lubeck is his name. And he's the guy that said you can see Jesus in every psalm, that he's there in every psalm. But anyway, so I've started reading Lubeck too. So he's good. He's got a book called Reading the Bible for a Change. And it's really good. But anyway, so we got to orient ourselves a little bit. The whole Bible is going to include Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. And we got to kind of check ourselves at the door, is what I heard Mackie saying. Let's not just automatically say, all my assumptions are right and all my, you know, let's hear a different perspective. And let's hear what's also in the text. So I think that's an important beginning before we dive in, to remember all those things. I'm sorry, what?
We practiced that, and it took a few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
To get past the idea that heaven wasn't up.
Yeah, that heaven may not be up, but it's up and down and here, and yeah, it's a little different. It's not a place that we're going. It's present in here. It's broken into this world. The life of heaven is broken into this world.
Some people say Eden on steroids.
Yeah, I love that. Eden on steroids. I love that. Who else? Anybody else have a question or comment or anything? Was this helpful getting started? He's going to dive right in now. And I guess the last thing I would say, if you've never been on the Bible Project website, classroom, there's all kinds of classes you can take. He's mentioned a couple that are really super helpful, even before you get to this one. You don't have to begin there, but one of them's on Genesis 1. He's not going to start in Genesis 1 next week. He's going to start in Genesis 2. Adam's being created, you know, kind of thing. And then there's the intro to the Hebrew Bible, which he kind of does a whole class on what he talked about tonight. In which, hey, we need to understand we're not reading, you know, something that was written in East Tennessee for East Tennesseans, you know. But yeah, it was. But it didn't start out that way. The only thing, if you don't mind, let me make note of this, just so that you're aware, because he mentioned this in kind of a sideways way. Basically, what everyone accepts now, except crazy people on the outsides. There's always crazy people on the outsides. But most biblical scholars say that with this material in the Old Testament, in Genesis, there was an oral tradition first. There was stories told amongst people, Moses, Aaron, the Levites, people of Israel, whoever was gifted, started putting it together, started getting it written down, and that it went through several forms. Okay, so remember there's a context. Mount Sinai, God's given His covenant. That's a context, and that's a reason to tell the story of Genesis, And that story of Genesis would be very important to say, those Egyptian gods, they didn't create you, But then it went through different forms. And finally it was put together in a collection like we have. Not in the same order, by the way. Christians have reordered the Old Testament. Okay, I don't like when you see the thought process of the way the Hebrews ordered the Old Testament. It makes so much more sense than the way that Christians have ordered it. Chronicles is the last book in the Old Testament for the Jews. Chronicles. Okay. And it makes so much sense. But it was put in its final form in the way that we read it at the exile when the Jews went off to Babylon. Either right as the exile was happening, as it happened, or when they got to Babylon, then it was put into this final form. These orders, so it went through a long process. So when he says it's multi-contextual, he means that there were stories passed around in a context, and then they were written down by Moses in a context, and then the exile is a context, and they're put in their final form, And so who's guiding, what do we believe about inspiration? Who's guiding all that? God's handling all that, But I don't believe God has in mind for us to just say, okay, forget the context. Let's just read it for 2023, first. No, it's got a lot to say about 2023 in Knoxville. But first of all, let's hear what they say and why they said it. And so that's one of the things he's going to do, is kind of talk about, so why this? Why? Anyway, yeah. Okay, that's it.